Welcome everybody to this October 2nd, our 183rd episode of the Minnesota Outdoor Skills and Stewardship Series. Our special guest, our friend Meadow, is joining us once again. She helped us out kind of at the last minute with a tree stand safety video here just a few weeks ago. Get to visit with you up in Grand Rapids and talking about preserving our memories of being out hunting and harvesting animals and how we can preserve some of that. So she's joining us today. So I'll turn it over to you, Meadow, and let you introduce yourself.
Awesome. Thanks, Benji. Well, as he stated, my name is Meadow Kouffeld, and I'm up here out of Grand Rapids. I teach at Tasca Community, or now Minnesota North College, but I'm also a taxidermist on the side. And so it's something that's been really important to me over the years is kind of preserving the memory. For me, it's really important to have good photos and things along those lines, but as we'll discuss, it's kind of goes long way back into human history, this idea of keeping something from your hunt that will help you remember that hunt or that experience later on. And so give me a moment to get my computer to respond here. So as I stated, it's something that goes back into human history, and it's basically the oldest association is humans and wildlife. We were highly dependent upon sources of wildlife as a species, as hunter and gatherers prior to modern era, and even into today. But I know that it's hard for me to find just one example, and so I tried to pull a lot of examples from around the world, and some are really old that we do have, and we continue to find things that suggest that this was a very important relationship, especially with hunting. And some of these artifacts suggest that there was an amazing amount of art and relic art dedicated to preserving the memory of a hunt or honoring those animals. And so it's very common to find hunts depicted on cave walls, as well as a lot of the artifacts that are found. And so we don't know much about deep history, but the reality is that when we do find these things, it suggests that it's been a lifelong or a human long thing to keep and remember hunts or experiences based on keeping things. So what I'm getting at is that it's normal. It's normal for people to want to keep something from their hunt, or keep something to remember a particular hunt or an animal. And it's something that we've been doing for a very long time, and we continue to do today. The reminder, though, that we all have different motivations for hunting. Not everybody agrees with taxidermy. Not everybody agrees with skulls or retaining hides. In fact, there are people who are taxidermists in other countries that are starting to face potential illegalization of taxidermy because it's considered potentially unethical in those other countries. But here in North America, luckily it's still something that we do, and people are able to relive those memories by looking at taxidermy or things that they've retained from the hunt. And we'll talk about, it's not necessarily pieces of the animal, but also maybe wood or a rock or something like that from the place that you hunted to kind of bring back a memory or provenance of that hunt. And a big part too is honoring the animal, the hunt, that memory, and we'll talk about it too. It's just you never really know maybe when it's someone's last hunt. There's been cases in my time as a taxidermist where someone passed away shortly after a hunt, and fortunately they had saved the birds or an animal from that hunt, and those people kind of retain that animal now as part of a memory or memoriam to that family member and that experience. And so for me personally, when I look at my taxidermy or anything that I've retained, it brings me right back to that memory. And so that's kind of what we're getting at today. I'll kind of break it down into birds and mammals, but what you'll note is that I do have some bird skulls on this slide. These are actually specimens. But the idea is that, there's a lot of different ways to preserve an animal. A lot of times people associate it with trophy hunting, but the reality is that what is a trophy? If it's a doe without antlers, that makes a beautiful skull, and that memory is no less valid because the animal doesn't have antlers, right? And so you'll see in this picture, there's a photo in the center here with a white tail, a Sitka blacktail on the bottom, and then we have two horned animals, a chamois, and a springbuck on either side. There are a few other things in that photo, like that doe skull in the lower right-hand corner, and that is a very memorable hunt, and I retained that animal. So European mounts are one of my favorites. I've got a lot of them in my house, and the beauty of European mounts, and that's what we call a skull basically, so it's a cleaned and whitened skull. Um, as a European model or European style. Some people use horn or antler plaques as well. This roe deer in the upper right-hand corner with the traditional German or Black Forest style carving on the plaque is an example of kind of that combination of the skull antler plaque. But you'll see antler plaques a lot of times have a leather wrapping. These are easy to do yourself. They aren't necessarily a clean process, but they are beautiful and they are something that will last for a very long time. And I like the fact that they don't take up much space because I have a small house and I have a lot of things in that house at this point. And I certainly, when I add something, I have to take something away. And so the beautiful thing about European mounts, they don't take up much space. On the lower right-hand corner, I got a bunch of pig skulls. So I got a wild pig, a javelina, a warthog, and then a domestic potbelly pig skull, which is part of the teaching collection I have. And just another example of ways that you might display these. A lot of people don't think about birds, but you can do bird skulls. There's an American woodcock skull and then 2 permitted collection skulls for the college. So I teach at the college. I have migratory bird permits and salvage permits to the state to retain skulls and things along those lines from protected species. And so what I use for my bird skulls is maggot maceration. So I skin the skulls, save them in the freezer, and then I use maggots basically in the summer months to clean these skulls and go through a bleach and peroxide process after that. Some more DIY for mammals. And again, this is an endless thing. These are just a few examples, but I want you guys to kind of think about alternative ways. You don't necessarily have to have taxidermy, but you might retain something and remember it. And so teeth is another thing that people have retained historically. Here in the lower right-hand corner, we see tusks that were retained from wild boars in Europe. And they have a process for preparing them by packing the hollow tusks with adhesive and oftentimes sawdust. Uh, in the lower left-hand corner are traditional leopard claws from a tribe in Africa. We do the same thing with bears. You think about a bear, they have about 20 claws that you can typically share with family members or yourself. I have a bear claw necklace from when I was a teenager that my mom made from a bear that I had shot when I was in that age class. And I still bring it out and wear it on occasions, but it certainly is a memento. And then more commonly in North America, as far as teeth that are retained, elk ivory, which is what this jewelry is, the silver jewelry that you see here. And those are basically the vestigial ivories that elk have that people retain. So there's some examples of things that you might retain from elk. Another thing, I don't have the photo here, but I'll oftentimes save the jaws from my deer, and I will clean them, and I cut the sections where it's just the molars, and then you can put them on a large keychain. And I have basically my own personal aging index. But the interesting thing is that we typically use deer jaws for aging and teeth in general with cementa manuali, but you can look at wear patterns. And some people retain them for personal records on their property. You can even write information on that jaw and retain it in a box. And so that would require that you take the jaw out, clean it. I cut mine, drill a hole, and string them. A cool side note, though, is that just like I alluded to earlier, wildlife managers in Europe use jaws to age and come up with an age class for their game animals in Europe, and they actually heavily manage by age class there. And if you look in the back of, say, that roe deer plaque that I showed earlier, a lot of times there's the deer's jaw is recessed in the back of that plaque for those age records over time. So part of European tradition. Some more DIYs and maybe not DIYs. I like to keep what's called back hides or full hides. This is a picture from my house on the right-hand side. What that is a quilt rack. I had all of these flat hides, and I have a bunch more still from Africa and North America and New Zealand. And the idea is that I didn't really have a good way to store them or display them, and so I ended up using a quilt rack, and really a beautiful display. There's also some Euros, as you see there, and a grouse mount. The other, though, is pillows, throws. People will have fur bearers sent off and they had throws made. And these are the pillows, and this hoop, the beaver hoop, are not my pictures. But those are examples of how people might use fur bearers to make, say, pillows. So flat hides, throws, pillows, upholstery. I've seen people upholster like curtain valances with deer hides. Certainly make handbags out of their animal hides. And then garments like vests and jackets, of course, hats. Fur bearers like the fox, cats, etc., raccoons. A lot of times people will make a hanging display as well as those beaver hoops. There are a fair amount of tanneries that in North America that you can ship your hides to. And if you're, say, not confident in shipping your hides, you can go through a furrier like USA Fox in Duluth. But the two I use primarily for taxidermy and for fur dressing is Moyle Mink and Tannery and the Wildlife Gallery, which are um, Wildlife Gallery is based in Michigan. Moyle Mink is in Idaho. And they are two of those tanneries that I would ship my own hides to if I was not doing taxidermy to have them dressed there. And dressing is basically tanning, but it's a garment tan. Oftentimes they're really soft, is the way I think of fur dressing. For sure, taxidermy. So this is the standard. People think of preserving the memory as having taxidermy. And it's not always like I've kind of showed you guys, I've got a lot of skulls, the Euros, in my house, in my office, and here at the college for teaching. But taxidermy is primarily what people think of when it comes to preserving an animal. And typically, taxidermy requires training or to be done by a professional. Because honestly, taxidermy is something that lasts a very long time. It takes up space. I think of it as art, and if it's not well done, it can be to some extent considered disrespectful to the animal if they have bad taxidermy done to them. And so that's something to think about, especially because you're going to look at it for the potentially the rest of your life. There are different styles. This is what's called a shoulder wall pedestal. So blacktail. And, this is my office space at home. And, it's tastefully done and it's not overwhelming. But again, eye of the beholder, different people like it. And so when I think about going on a trip, and this is before I became a mammal taxidermist, first I would locate the taxidermist I wanted to use, especially after moving to Minnesota, and I moved away from my taxidermist from my youth in California. And this means that you find somebody you like the work and you're willing to pay the price, right? So there are cheap taxidermists and there are good taxidermists, and they're not always cheap good taxidermists. And so you have to find the person that you're comfortable with taking your animal to, typically before you go. It's the best idea. And like I said, not all taxidermy is created equal. Be sure you like what you see and avoid the disappointment. I get a lot of people that reach out to me. They're like, oh, it's not so great. And I shouldn't have gone to that person. Can you redo it? Well, oftentimes, once taxidermy has been done, it cannot be redone. Or if it is redone, it costs the money to take it apart, to rehydrate, to clean, to resew. And so basically paying to dismantle the old taxidermy and redo on a new mount. So it ends up costing you twice or maybe three times as much depending on the project. And so when it comes to this too is, you communicate with your taxidermist to get an idea of what they need it to look like when they receive it. What kind of cut should you make when you skin the animal for the type of mount that you want to have done? So it's a good idea to develop a relationship with a taxidermist. There are how-to or DIY videos. There's some really great ones. And as we'll talk about later, YouTube. You can learn a lot from YouTube, but certainly I would not want to do a life size or anything along those lines without training. It's a ton of work and requires some specialized experience. We'll move into birds. I'm a big bird hunter, especially with where I live in northern Minnesota. It is a grouse haven, right? So we have some of the best grouse hunting in the nation here in northern Minnesota. And last year was a spectacular year. So it's not just grouse though. I used to waterfowl hunt a lot. People real popular to keep feathers from their animals, and sometimes you keep maybe specific feathers like tail curls on mallards. Or if you're in an area with a lot of pintail, people tend to keep their pintail sprigs. It's the middle feathers on the tail, real long and tapered. Grouse feathers too. Grouse come in color phases, right? So this upper right-hand corner are some of my grouse tail fan photo I took last winter. And then also this framed piece down here is a piece I did for a client that lives in Texas and came up here to grouse hunt. And that is an example of displaying the different color phases in a house. It's a fairly expensive project, but you don't need to have fancy framing to pull this off. You can make your own frames or repurpose old frames with tail fans in them. Other ways I've seen it done is people have made bow ties out of feathers. I have ornaments, Christmas ornaments that have been given to me throughout the years by older, craftier ladies that are made out of pheasant feathers. I've certainly seen women and men wear earrings with feathers. Feathers are really light. They unfortunately pick up your oils, but they're really light, so they are nice to wear as earrings, but it's not as durable. And then brooches, right? The others, I have arrangements, two of them in my house that are primarily pheasant tail feathers. That's what I do with my pheasant tail feathers. And then of course this photo matting. Tail fans, this is something you can look up on YouTube on how to do. I use borax. A lot of people use salt, but a little bit of patience and some basic tools, plus some tape, you can come up with a great set of tail fans. And there are different methods, but like I said, I didn't want to spend too much time going into the process today. I just want to open your minds to some of the options. And salting is fine. It's just I like borax because I feel like long term the fans stay cleaner. And as far as displays go, I'm going to send a little shout out to Frame Up in Grand Rapids. They do a great job working with tail fans and some thinking out of the box. And I think a lot of frame shops, as long as they're open to hunting or okay with hunting, are going to have some creative ideas. And so what I'll do is oftentimes I'll bring in what I need framed with me. I have a rough criteria dimensions, and they help me go through the process of matching colors and coming up with an idea. In this case, we came up with a shadow box, and really a beautiful piece. It's got a little asymmetry in it because that's just birds in general nature, but really a cool idea. Other things that people keep from birds, feet. There's a long tradition of keeping feet, especially red grouse and ptarmigan in Europe. They're kept for different reasons, but they're oftentimes seen as a brooch, you know, like a brooch or a kilt pin. And so they don't necessarily see that a ton here in North America, but people do keep their bird feet and dry them out. Certainly the bones of birds they have really strong, typically primarily hollow, maybe fenestrated bones. And so you can make flutes out of them. In this case, turkey call strikers. Neither one of these are my photos, but they're examples. And these turkey call strikers came directly off a how-to or DIY website. And a striker is basically what you use on the slate to make the turkey call. And so this is one more way to kind of keep a piece of that animal with you moving forward. Skulls on the larger birds. Like I said, I use maceration, which would be decomposition, or maggots. Bird skulls are so fragile that maggots work really well. I know it seems offensive or off-putting, but maggots do a really good job of eating just the soft tissues and not breaking it down. Ants, on the other hand, will eat a lot of the smaller bones and break those skulls apart. But they make a cool framed item, believe it or not. Bird skulls, if you frame them, can be really neat. And then spurs. Some of the spurred games, so like turkeys. I'll show this afterward, but I'm holding in my hand basically a bunch of spurs, some beards, and then the shotgun caps from those hunts. And these are just some beards I had laying around from years of hunting and put them together last year just to keep them in one place. But spurs, again, pheasants, primarily turkeys and pheasants here in North America as far as the spurred fowl go, and retaining spurs and leg bones. Taxidermy, this is what I, again, do. I'm a big fan of bird taxidermy because it's just one of my strong suites, and I love birds. And so the thing about birds and mammals too, when it comes to taxidermy, is you really need to think about where you're going to put it and what the long term is. And so bird mounts, even though they're smaller, can be fairly expensive because there's a fair amount of work and materials that go into it, time and skill. It takes a lot of skill to be a bird taxidermist. And you have to ask yourself some long-term questions. This last December, I just brought an old Aleutian cackling goose mount back from California in the back of my truck from when I was in college. And that's a bird that takes up 3 by 3 by 2 feet. And when you're moving, that's a lot of space, and they're fragile, so they're hard to move, very delicate. And so you have to think about those things long term if you are going to move. You know, maybe a flying mount isn't a good mount. Maybe you want a compact dead mount, which is this one here in the lower right hand corner. And the thing about dead mounts is they take up less space, whereas a flying mount takes up more space. So these are conversations you can have with your taxidermist. And the thing about birds, if you're into birds, so you've got to find a very specific taxidermist. Not all taxidermists can do birds, and many of them won't do them because they are difficult to do and they're difficult to get right. And so when it comes to bird taxidermy, it's a good idea, just like with mammals, to have a taxidermist in mind and have maybe a conversation with them on how they want their birds stored. For myself, I want birds, I think it's on the next slide, stored a certain way so that they don't dry out. And so the same thing with mammals, if you're going to tan the skin or have the animal mounted, you want to kind of keep that skin as hydrated as possible by keeping it in an airtight container, be it a Ziploc or maybe a contractor style trash bag and double wrapped. Again, you're trying to reduce the amount of air that circulates around those animals when you are putting them into the freezer. And so first thing with the bird, same thing with mammals, protect it. If you're dragging a deer, don't drag it, carry it. If you have to drag the deer, I've sacrificed jackets and put them on the deer to keep from dragging. Because what happens when you drag an animal is that they wear off the skin on their shoulders or the hair on their shoulders, or it breaks off. And so same thing with birds. If you're in a game bag, so you're grouse hunting or something, you have a game bag, make sure that bird stays on top of all the other birds. You don't pile it underneath it. You don't grab it by the neck. Remember that the condition of the animal coming into the taxidermist dictates in big part what it looks like when it comes out. So protect that animal. In the case of birds, keep it on top. Get it away from the other birds as soon as possible. Cool it down ASAP. Birds, mammals, all those things, they start to slip or decay. That means the hair or the feathers kind of just come out easy. It slips right out, especially around the belly region or the vent region on birds. And so if you're on a warm day with birds, you want to get it on top of ice so it's not wet but cool as soon as possible, or keep it away from a pile of birds. And then when you get home, freeze it as soon as possible. And how do we do this? Well, how I prefer it is I want you to wrap the bird's head with paper towels and wrap the feet with paper towels. Put it in a freezer Ziploc, be it a gallon, 2 gallon if it fits. If it's bigger, you need a trash bag. Wet those pieces of paper, push the air out, roll it up, seal it, put some tape around it, and I write the information from the hunter, the bird, etc. on there. Then put it in another bag, wrap that up so it's double ziplocked, double trash bagged, tape it, and then make sure it's labeled when you put it in the freezer. And once you put it in the freezer, you're good for a little while, but ideally you get it to a taxidermist as soon as possible, or when they have an opening. A lot of taxidermists like myself don't necessarily always have openings right away, so you get on a list. But that's essentially the rough of how you would go ahead and freeze those birds. So that's kind of what I have for you guys today. Benji, I don't know if you want to bring me over to a full screen and I can share this picture or this
Yeah,
item.
if you want to stop sharing your PowerPoint there,
Okay, give me, for some reason there it is, the bubbles. I don't see how I can unshare. Apologies on that one.
should be a little
Stop sharing. There we go.
stop.
There
There you
we
go.
go.
All right. Yeah, you have to show up that the turkey beards. I'm
Okay, so I know that it's not the best background, but this was what I was showing earlier. And what I did here, and I often do, I save the casings or the shells from particular memorable hunts. In this case, I just have the brass from the shells that are used as a base for the beard, and then I have dried, salted, and then basically took a saw of some sort, any saw will work, and cut on either side of the spur and then put it on a piece of wire. And this is, for me, it was just to consolidate them because they were kind of bouncing around my shop. And that's an example. And then I showed this beaver earlier, but it doesn't have to be a big game animal to keep the Euro mounts. That's the thing, is a lot of people get hung up on, well, I shot a doe, or I shot a female grouse, or it's a female duck, or blah, blah, blah. People get down on themselves about not having a trophy because sometimes it's not seen as valid or worthy, but in reality is every animal is worth a memory. And so there's a lot of different options, and I hope this helped people think outside the box.
yeah, that was great. And one of the I personally don't keep a whole lot of mementos, and
Mhm.
the couple I do have, I've the first doe I ever shot, first year I ever shot when I was probably 13 years old. I have the two front hooves mounted on a board
Yeah,
and I guess shaped up so I can put a gun. It's kind of like a little gun rack. So I still have that, several years later now.
yeah.
That was kind of
So,
fun, and we had the only other experience I have ever in taxidermy was kind of a funny story. When I was real young, like 9, 10 years old, I had a BB gun, and my grandpa paid me a quarter for shooting pigeons out of the barn that would go in
oh,
there and wreck the hay. So I have later on, I went out and I got a pigeon, and I tried to do taxidermy on that. And you're right, it's super hard to do taxidermy on birds. I don't have any experience to relate that to other than this crazy pigeon that we decided we were going to try this on. And it is no longer in existence because I found out when you um, put a piece of shelled corn and shellac that on your pigeon mound, that a lot of critters like to come and eat that. So
well, the
it's
pigeon is one of the more difficult birds to mount. Very thin skin, and they have their feathers fall out very easily, so they don't attach. So like the columbiforms or the dove-like birds really aren't easy to mount. So you picked a wrong one to try. Should have used a crow or something.
I have fond memories of
Yeah,
sitting out there and making a quarter a day trying to get a pigeon or two out of my grandpa's barn when I was a little kid. So it was
yeah,
more of a fun memory than anything. So,
good.
Bill had a question for you. What is the best way to prepare a hide for fur on tanning, skinning, salting, folding, rolling, etc.?
I used to dry stuff, and so now that I do primarily taxidermy, so it depends. What depends what species really he's talking about. But fur bearers traditionally were drying. So in the winters, usually when people are handling fur in Minnesota, and the air is drier and it's cooler, so things don't decompose as fast. But you would flesh it and put it on a stretcher, depending on the species fur in or out. But I salt everything because I'm not selling that fur. It's not going through an auction house. And so I salt things. And so in salting, you have to get all the flesh and fat off, turn the lips, ears, eyes, and nose, and then salt it inside out. And what I use is you go to like Fleet Farm, it's called livestock mixing salt, and it's like $6 for 50 pounds. And I have a tote with that salt in there, and I lay a tarp on the ground, and I heavily salt the hides. Then you fold them up when they're heavily salted but still pliable and put them in a box and ship them to the tannery.
Have you ever tried doing any deer hides yourself? I know that there's a difference between obviously tanning a deer hide, just the hide, and then having the hair on it and all that stuff. And I know I tried one years ago. We used to be able to send them off to a place in Owatonna, Uber Glove or something like that.
Okay.
Do a
Hmm.
fantastic job of it. I don't know if they're still around or not, but
Right
I
on.
tried to do one with hide on or the hair on one time, and it was super stiff. And I don't know,
Hmm. Yeah,
thinking,
it takes a lot of water. When I was a kid, my mom used to brain tan stuff, and she
yeah,
used traditional practices. But that's very different than the hair on. And I just honestly, I've never seen a home tan job go well. So I'd rather pay for deer, whatever is 52 to $100 for the tanning process and comes back beautiful. So I'd rather have someone else do it. It takes a ton of water and space, and you have to be kind of up on
yeah.
chemistry. There's a lot of things that go into it, and have a shaver. That's the other thing, is I don't have a shaver, and I don't really want to invest in shaving or learning how to shave.
I used to trap a little bit when I was in high school, and there's a whole art just cleaning
Hmm.
those skins and keeping them so they, you can use them to the best of, I guess, the best of their ability at a
Yeah.
time. So
Well, that's an art too, to like turning hides when they're just dry enough, like the canids and things like that. There's an art to touching and knowing when they're dry enough where they're not going to stick together or decompose, but also turn. There's an art there.
yeah. Uh, Joni was wondering, what's the best way to clean a sharp-tailed grouse or other bird with really loose breast feathers to avoid losing so many feathers?
Well, it depends on what the ultimate point is. Like, is she wanting to eat the meat and do the taxidermy, or
And I'm guessing to get the guts and stuff out of that bird as soon as
okay?
possible, or
Well, yeah. She said something about loose feathers. So that's why I was wondering if she wanted to keep like the full cape. Some people will keep the full cape and then they'll salt it. And then they have for fly tying, that's another one. People keep bird skins for fly tying if they're a fly fisherman or angler. And so that might be what it is. But either way,
She just commented back, no, just to get the guts out.
oh, just to get the guts out. Well, I do that. I core my birds in the field so they don't stay hot. And basically, if you're not gonna mount it, you just want to eat it. You can pull the vent feathers, so the fluffy ones right south of the cloaca. Pull those. And I take a small knife and just cut the slit, and I use my fingers just pull in, pull core the bird. Essentially, you go up below the giblets and pull out the intestinal tract. And then I have a squirt bottle for my dogs, and I just squirt it out and then put it in my pack. I think hopefully that answers your question. That's a demonstration we
Yeah.
can make a video of.
It's hard to do without the bird, but
Yeah, well, it's you think about it, the keel bone is smooth where the breastbone is, and so your fingers just kind of glide over the back of your fingernails, glide over that keel bone, and you just hook with your fingers and pull it, and so that pulls out that out of that cavity.
interesting. Keep a lot of the feathers. I know I've kept a few feathers from pheasant and um, tail fans for turkey too, and they're another one that the critters get into. So don't leave them in your garage too much is my tip on that one. But
Yeah, that's a really good point, Benji, is that when you do have taxidermy, you invest in it or you've done it yourself, you put the time into it, is keeping the bugs out of it and mice. Surprisingly,
yeah,
mice are bad, and the other one is cats and dogs, especially birds that have live or the real head in them, ducks and stuff. Cats tend to eat the face off of birds. So no cats around your taxidermy, keep it out of the dog's reach, and then the bugs and the mice in particular, especially cabins. Dark spaces are not good for taxidermy because that's where the bugs like to be.
good point.
Yeah.
Uh, Bill had a question. Where's your best place to send a deer hide or beaver hide for fur on tanning? You put a
Um,
couple links in the chat, but
yeah, right now I like Moyle Mink because they have a tracking system. And if it was just fur dressing, that's who I've been sending stuff to for 16 years for fur dressing, so garment stuff. And they come back really beautiful from Moyle Mink. That's that place in Idaho. And yeah, that's the one I recommend for because it has a user interface where you can literally track they receive the items and so you kind of know where it's at when it's coming back. And that USA Fox and Duluth ships last I knew shipped everything to Moyle and Meek.
oh yeah, yeah. There's not too many places around that do that anymore. So I
No,
know
it's
it's
and it's hard to find. Unfortunately, sometimes some smaller places are not necessarily dependable or trustworthy, and so that's the balance. Is as a taxidermist, is when I've got somebody's memory, there's a lot of pressure to make sure that it gets done right, and so that's why I use bigger tanneries. I hate to promote one person over another, but that's my justification.
yeah. I'm sure you're going to get back what you anticipate in
Yeah.
good quality. So I know I've done some stuff. I did a pair of beaver mittens for my sister who runs dogs up in Alaska a fair amount. So, but yeah, get get those sent out, and that one was salted and tanned, and got it back, and was able to make some nice pair of choppers for her.
Yeah,
But
if you're not handy like that, you can go through USA Fox and place furriers will take your hides and they'll make them into choppers or a vest or a throw. So I know a few people did you sew yours by hand?
yeah, yep,
Okay, yeah. It's a lot of work.
it is. It was back before I had kids and had more time to do
Mhm.
that stuff. So,
Yeah.
but if you have any other questions, enter those into the chat. I know Meadow is running to a class actually teaching after this, so we're going to end a few minutes early. But if you want to make sure we get to all your questions, if we can, so I don't see any other ones in the chat. Cassie or Craig, if you see any I'm missing, jump in too. Um, Other than that, I think next week we are with this crazy warm weather. We're still going to try to do this, but we're going to have a live program from Dodge Nature Center on cooking out. Camping is a big part of Minnesota, and I learned this year that MEA is the largest camping weekend in Minnesota. I don't know if you knew that or not, but MEA Minnesota is a big time to get out with your friends and family and go camping, I guess. So we're gonna do a little campfire cooking next week to get out there and enjoy some treats around the campfire. So I don't see any other questions. Meadow, thank you so much for making time for us today and joining us and talking a little bit about taxidermy and just the process and different options people have to make these really cool mementos that they can save and carry on and pass on to other generations if they want to, or just have fond memories as they get older and maybe can't get out as much, or of a special hunt they did with somebody. It's really a cool thing to look back on. So really
Yeah,
appreciate your time.
you're welcome. I hope people kind of start to think outside the box. There's a lot of options, and like I try and utilize as much of the animal as I can, and there's a lot of creative ways to do that.
Great. I think with that, Cassie, we'll end the recording and we'll see everybody next week. Everybody have a safe and fun weekend out there.